Watch his eyes. Notice anything? Anthony Hopkins doesn't blink. Not once. Not during the most intense scenes in film history. And this one choice? It turned Hannibal Lecter into cinema's most terrifying villain. Here's what Hopkins did. First, where this technique came from. Second, why it's genius. And finally, I think the most important thing is the psychology that makes it impossible to look away. He was on screen for just 16 minutes and won an Oscar.
And the Oscar goes to Anthony Hopkins and the Silence of the Lambs.
Watch closely. You don't want to miss this. Let's break it down. The Silence of the Lambs, 1991. Anthony Hopkins walks into that prison cell. He's wearing white, perfectly still. And when Clarice Starling approaches, he does something most actors would never risk. He stops blinking. Now, you might think this is an exaggeration. Maybe he blinks a few times, right? No. Hopkins blinks maybe once or twice in his entire 16 minutes of screen time. And when he does blink, it's slow, deliberate, conscious. Here's what normal looks like. The average person blinks 15 to 20 times per minute. That's once every 3 to 4 seconds. Your body does this automatically. You're not even aware of it. It's a reflex, essential, protective. Hopkins removed it. Watch the first meeting between Clarice and Lecter. She walks down that hallway. Other prisoners are screaming, throwing things. But when she reaches Lecter's cell, everything stops. He's standing in the center, perfectly still, staring. And for the next 4 minutes of dialogue, Hopkins doesn't blink once. Not once. Director Jonathan Demme didn't ask for this. It wasn't in Ted Talley's script. This was Hopkins' choice, and it changed everything. But here's the question nobody asks. Where did he learn this? Hopkins learned this from a madman.
Asylum or...
No, but I've actually met a madman who's on the loose in London, and that's pretty scary.
Yeah.
A real one. Here's the story. Before filming The Silence of the Lambs, Hopkins was in London. He's at a coffee shop, and he meets someone. Hopkins later described this person as someone who was on the loose and pretty scary. They sit down, they talk, and Hopkins realizes something is very wrong. This man never blinks. Hopkins said in an interview, he kept asking me questions. Before you could answer, he'd ask another one, and then another. It made you feel like you were living in a different reality. That stuck with him. But it wasn't just the madman. Hopkins studied serial killers. He watched tapes of Charles Manson. Manson had the same thing, that unblinking stare, that stillness. And Hopkins recognized a pattern. Predators don't blink before they strike. Then Hopkins made another connection. Reptiles. He noticed that reptiles only blink when they want to. It's not a reflex for them. It's a choice. They do it consciously. And when Hopkins studied snakes, lizards, monitor lizards, he realized something. When they're hunting, they don't blink at all. So Hopkins decided to bring that into Hannibal Lecter. He trained himself. He practiced this technique, conditioning himself to hold his gaze, not blinking, just being still. And he discovered something powerful. Stillness has an economy, and it has a power about it. Those are Hopkins' own words. He learned this from watching great American actors. Actors who understood that less is more, that the absence of movement can be more terrifying than any action. And if you're enjoying this breakdown, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. I analyze cinema's greatest secrets every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. But here's what you need to understand. Not blinking was just the beginning. Hopkins built an entire performance around stillness, the voice. That's where it started. Hopkins said he knew what Lecter sounded like from the first read. He based the voice on 2 sources. First,
the computer, 2001.
Why HAL?
Because he's a machine.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Calm, logical, unemotional, precise. Second, his teacher at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, Christopher Fettus. Hopkins said Fettus had a cutting voice. He would slice you to pieces with his analysis. His precision was terrifying. And Hopkins brought that into Lecter. Listen to how Lecter speaks. Every word is chosen. Nothing is wasted. There's no warmth, no hesitation, just calculation. Then there's the posture. Hopkins insisted on standing in the center of his cell when Clarice first sees him.
When she comes down the corridor, because Jonathan Demme said, how do you want to be seen when she comes down the corridor to see you in the cell? Do you want to be sitting on the bunk, or I said, no, standing in the middle of the cell? I said, yeah, I can smell her. And John said, you're weird.
Think about that. Most actors would be sitting, reading, doing something to appear casual. Hopkins chose to stand, perfectly centered, waiting, like a predator that knew its prey was approaching. Now here's where it gets insane. And then there's the white suit. The original plan was to put Lecter in a yellow or orange jumpsuit after he was moved from Baltimore, standard prison attire. Hopkins said no. He convinced Demi and costume designer Colleen Atwood that white would be more unsettling. Hopkins said the idea came from his fear of dentists, the clinical whiteness, the sterile environment. It makes you think of hospitals, of operating rooms, of something medical and therefore somehow legitimate, even though you know what's underneath is anything but. Every choice Hopkins made was about removing humanity. Blinking makes you human. Movement makes you human. Warmth in your voice makes you human. Hopkins stripped all of that away. But there's one more element, and this one is crucial: direct eye contact. Demi did something revolutionary. He had actors look directly into the camera lens during key scenes. This breaks the invisible wall of cinema. Normally, actors look at each other. You, the viewer, are watching from the outside. But when an actor looks into the lens, they're looking at you. Combined with Hopkins' unblinking stare, this creates something unbearable. You feel like Lecter is looking straight through you, into you, and you can't escape, because he never looks away, he never blinks, he never gives you a moment to breathe.
On Silence of the Lambs, is it true that did you never speak to Anthony Hopkins?
No, never spoke to him. He was scary. I mean, the first day we had a reading, we had like a little read through, and I got there early, and then I went to the bathroom, and I came back. Everybody was sitting down. We did the read through of the film, and by the end of it, I never wanted to talk to him again. I was petrified.
And Hopkins stayed in character between takes. He would lash out at crew members in Lecter's voice if they entered his cell. Demi loved it. He kept saying, "Oh my God, you're so weird." But Hopkins knew exactly what he was doing. He was building a predator, not a man, a predator. And predators don't blink. Which brings us to the question: why does this work? Your brain recognizes when something is wrong. You might not consciously notice that Lecter doesn't blink, but your subconscious does, and it triggers something primal, something ancient. It's called the Uncanny Valley effect. When something looks almost human but isn't quite right, your brain rejects it. It creates a feeling of unease, disgust, fear. You can't explain why, you just know something is wrong. Hopkins weaponized this. Think about how you recognize a predator. Not a movie predator, a real one, a shark, a snake, a big cat. What do they all have in common? Stillness before the strike. They watch, they don't blink. And your brain has evolved over millions of years to recognize this pattern. When something is too still, too focused, too patient, your survival instinct screams at you to run. That's what Hopkins tapped into. He made Lecter feel like something that exists outside of human behavior, something that operates on a different frequency. And here's the genius of it. Look at the power dynamic. When Clarice visits Lecter, watch what happens. She blinks constantly. She swallows. Her eyes dart around. She shifts her weight. Every single one of these micro movements shows nervousness, shows humanity, shows vulnerability. Lecter does none of this. He stands still. He stares. He doesn't blink. And immediately, even though Clarice is free and Lecter is behind bars, you know who's in control. The one who doesn't blink is the one with power. There's no jump scares in the Silence of the Lambs. No loud noises. No gore in Lecter's scenes. The horror comes from intimacy, from being seen, from being analyzed by something that doesn't recognize you as human, just as prey. Hopkins' restraint turns the space between words into something unbearable. His face barely moves, but every line lands like a strike, and that unblinking stare lingers long after the scene ends. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. Hopkins is on screen for 16 minutes and 52 seconds. That's it. In a film that runs almost 2 hours and 20 minutes, Hopkins appears for less than 17 minutes, and he won the Academy Award for Best Actor. At the time, this was a record, the shortest performance to win Best Actor. Think about that. Most leading performances are 60, 70, 80 minutes of screen time. Hopkins did it in 16. How? Because every single second counts. There's no wasted moments, no filler. Lecter appears in exactly 4 major scenes: his introduction, the quid pro quo scene, his escape, and the final phone call. Each scene is strategically placed to maximize impact. You're not watching Lecter for most of the movie, but you're always thinking about him. He's built up through whispers, through fear, through the reactions of other characters, and when he finally appears, he's already living in your head. Steven Spielberg did the same thing with Jaws. What you don't see is more terrifying than what you do see. Hopkins understood this. Less is more. Absence creates presence. And behind the scenes, Hopkins was meticulous. His method of preparation is legendary. He memorizes his lines by repeating them over 200 times. 200 times! Until the words are so ingrained that he can forget he's acting. He can just be. Hopkins said he doesn't use method acting. He thinks it's a pain in the ass. He said, "Who the hell wants to be with some miserable grump because he wants to get his performance right?" Instead, Hopkins just learns the lines, finds the voice, finds the stillness, and becomes. Jodie Foster said Hopkins' performance was one of the great lessons for her as an actor. Director Jonathan Demme said Hopkins was brilliantly weird and encouraged him to go even further. Every idea Hopkins brought, Demme supported. The result? Hannibal Lecter became the greatest screen villain of all time, according to the American Film Institute. Not because he's a cannibal, but because Hopkins made him feel real, intelligent, and completely, utterly still. Now, there's one other actor who mastered this exact technique, Javier Bardem. Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men. Same predator stillness, same unblinking stare, but he adds something Hopkins didn't, a coin toss. Every time tension builds, the coin replaces the blink. I've broken down how Bardem weaponized this technique on the cards above if you want to see the comparison. But even Bardem will tell you, Hopkins set the template. Every villain who uses stillness now is following Hopkins' blueprint. And here's the thing, Hopkins wasn't even the first actor to play Lecter. He wasn't the last either. Brian Cox played him before. Mads Mikkelsen played him after. So why does Hopkins' version endure? Brian Cox played Lecter first in Manhunter. Mads Mikkelsen played him later in the TV series Hannibal. Both gave excellent performances. Both are talented actors. Neither matched Hopkins, because Hopkins understood something fundamental. Acting isn't about doing more. It's about precision. It's about control. It's about knowing exactly when to move and when to be still. Hopkins took away blinking, took away fidgeting, took away warmth, and what remained was something that feels like it came from another world. A predator, a machine, something beyond human. Next time you watch The Silence of the Lambs, you won't see Hannibal Lecter. You'll see a predator that forgot how to blink, and you'll understand why Hopkins won an Oscar for 16 minutes, because every second was perfect. So that's the secret. Hopkins didn't blink. He studied madmen and reptiles. He built a character from stillness and precision, and he proved that the scariest performances don't come from screaming or violence. If this changed how you see the film, hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into cinema's greatest moments. And drop a comment. What other movie details have you never noticed? What should I break down next? Please mention it in the comments. I'll see you there.